All right. Oh, am I on? You hear me? Yes. Good evening. Welcome to Science on Tap Cincinnati. Let me be the first to wish you a happy winter solstice. Couple initial comments. We've been back live here at Urban Artifact for the last, 7 months or so. It's hard to remember with COVID and Zoom and everything going on, but we're so appreciative that we're able to be back in person and share all of this great science in Cincinnati with you all live. So a special shout out to Urban Artifact for this space, and again especially our friends Andrew and Devin from Radio Artifact to put together all the AV. They're streaming all these events, they're recording all of them. You can go back and you can watch any of these Science on Tap events at their channels on YouTube and Twitch. In addition, Radio Artifact uses this space a lot, to promote a lot of indie music. And you should go to their website, Radio Artifact, and check out, what's coming up. In particular, since it is the holiday season, this Sunday afternoon, they're having a special holiday concert upstairs. I think it's supposed to start around 4 o'clock. There's going to be piano solo music, some jazz music. I hear there's a choir. There's all different kinds of things to get you into the holiday mood. So if you're looking for something to do musical Sunday afternoon, check that out at their website as well. Those of you who live here in Cincinnati, or maybe spent a long time here in Cincinnati, you probably, if you've gone to a local park or in your own backyard, undoubtedly, if you've picked up a rock, I would say at least 9 times out of 10, the rock had nothing but lots of fossils in it. And that's what our topic is tonight. 450 million years ago, the Cincinnati area was under a shallow sea. And we're kind of at the epicenter of some of the great fossil record of that Ordovician period. So our speaker tonight is the expert on all that. It is Brenda Hunda. She is the curator of invertebrate paleontology at the Cincinnati Museum Center. And she will tell us all the different things to know about trilobites and all the other wonderful creatures that used to live under the sea in our area. So please welcome Brenda Hunda.
This is quite the setup, and I feel like I should be giving you a comedy routine, and it should be on HBO or something. Yes, what you'll learn about me is that I'm very bad at tech, but I'm really great at rocks. So we all have our strengths and weaknesses. Thanks for coming out tonight. It's a real pleasure to be here. Bob talked a little bit about sort of my expertise area. So if you've ever been stuck at the cut in the hill behind a semi-trailer traffic accident, or just the regular traffic that we have there, and look to your right, if you're going south, you'll see those big sequences of rocks. Oftentimes those rocks have beautiful icicles on them, all kinds of things. Those are world famous. People come from all over the world to study them. I'm here to study them. We're actually known as a North American Upper Ordovician type standard, which basically means if you want to study those rocks in North America, Cincinnati is the flagship place. It is the type place to come, and those rocks are known as the Cincinnatian series. They are full of fossils that tell us about how life existed in this region about 450 million years ago. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but then I'm going to switch a little bit, because what I really want to focus on are landslides tonight. How many of you have had an experience with moving earth of some sort on your property in Cincinnati? Maybe it's caused a traffic jam on your way to work because Columbia Parkway's decided to get angry at you. All those kinds of things. Okay, so there's a real deep history, what we call deep time history, associated with why we have landslides in Cincinnati. And landslides are one of our top natural disasters. So when we think about Cincinnati, we think about like maybe, you know, some really bad thunderstorms, the occasional tornado, definitely flooding. But landslides are one of the top things that the city has to deal with, and there's a geological and a human reason of putting that all together as to why we have major landslides in the Cincinnati area. This is on Elberon Avenue, by the way, in 2014, where we had a major spring rains. And that year was kind of like a banner year for a lot of landslides in the area because of the amount of moisture that had gotten into the hillsides. And I had the benefit, you'll soon learn this about me, of being able to watch that come down. I was standing right there watching the whole hillside come down. I am a natural disasters buff. I know that this is sometimes off-putting to people because natural disasters ultimately mean potential harm to humans and property and all that kind of stuff. And I don't like that part. What I do really enjoy, though, is the power of the earth, the processes that operate on the earth, and every once in a while giving us a kick in the pants to remind us who's boss. And I just kind of really like watching that power and that energy and the dynamic nature of our planet. You know, it's really easy for us to drive from Kroger to our job to home, to Kroger to our job to home, to CVS to our home every day and see the same things every day and forget that we live on a very dynamic planet that is constantly changing. Every once in a while, we'll get a reminder that the systems that operate to shape our planet, that we have been going on for billions of years, still operate today. And every once in a while, we get in the way. So I want to start out by giving you this very unreadable graph. Yes. Which is, because it is so far away, which is the geologic timescale. I'm going to come up here and hopefully not trip over any of this and point out a few things. I'm a walker, by the way. Our Earth is 4.57 billion years old, so this is 4.6 all the way up to the top, which is 0, the present day. And if you just highlight that upper little box right there in blue and expand it out, that's the last 600 million years of geologic time. The reason why we really focus on the last 600 million years on our planet is because that's really when complex life arose. It's a little bit further back than that, and the geologic record and paleontological record is constantly pushing those dates back. But that's really where we start seeing multicellularity, and we start seeing things like sponges and corals and all the really early animals coming into play. We're going to focus really on a few areas. We're going to focus first on the record that we have here in Cincinnati 450 million years ago. That is the age of all the rocks that you see in this area. That's a full 250 million years before the first dinosaur ever walked the planet. So we are talking old stuff. Way older than the first reptiles. There's no mammals, there's no birds, there's no amphibians. There's fish on Earth, but there's no fish here yet. They didn't come to Cincinnati for some reason. Okay, and then we're going to skip a whole series all the way up to the last 2 million years. So this is the last 65 million years of geologic time here after the dinosaurs. And we're going to skip up to the last 2 million years. Our story here in Cincinnati that impacts our landslides has to do with the rocks that are 450 million years old and the rocks that are 2 million years old, with a huge gap in between. Okay, so that's kind of where we're going to play today. So I want to go back 450 million years ago with you. I love paleontology. It's like the best thing in the world because it's the closest thing we have to time travel, right? So I get to go back and think about life all the time in the Jurassic, in the Cretaceous, in the Ordovician. I'm always in the past. But deep time passed, and I think about the way the world was and how it has contributed to what we have today. Why does it matter what happened 450 million years ago? Well, we're going to learn a little bit of that today. So, is everyone familiar with plate tectonics? Right. So we know that through time, oceans and continents and their configurations are constantly on the move and have changed, right? North American plate, the plate that we're currently sitting on, moves southwest from our current position at about the rate of an inch a year. And we know that it doesn't move slowly. We know that it moves very quickly in big jerks, and those are what we call earthquakes, right? So we're not like floating on this like gentle riding continent plate, right? We've got a lot of these natural disasters that help make these happen. This is what the world looked like 450 million years ago. A little bit different than what we experience today. I'm going to point out a couple of key features for you. The first is the red star is where our region is located in the southern hemisphere. So Cincinnati, and in fact most of North America, has been a southern hemisphere continent for most of its geologic history. We have only been in the northern hemisphere as a continent since the last 225 million years, which out of 4.6 billion is what we consider a snapshot, really. It's very, very quick geologically speaking. So we're a southern hemisphere continent. A couple other things to note. The blue is where the ocean is, and the green, of course, is exposed land. At this time in Earth's history, we don't have much of a fossil record of life on land yet. We do have some indications of early plants like mosses and bryophytes. These are the non-vascular plants that just kind of might skirt lagoons. We have spores from these plants that indicate that they did exist, but we don't have full terrestrialization. There's no trees yet, they haven't evolved. There's no dragonflies on land, nothing like that, okay? So for the most part, from what we know about the fossil record currently, the land is pretty much completely barren, okay? So because continents change configurations, they come together, they move apart, they evolve, much like life does, but inorganically, of course. We know that the continent of North America, as we recognize it today, did not exist. We had the core of what we recognize as North America today, but because it was a different continent, geologists have to give it a different name, just to confuse you. And the name back in the Ordovician is known as Laurentia. So I think of Laurentia as the proto-North America. It's going to grow into what we recognize as North America. And in fact, North America didn't really become North America as we recognize it until T-Rex crossed our paths. So that would be the Cretaceous time. Geologists don't refer to our continent as North America until the Cretaceous time period. And that's because the continents grow and change. And that's a whole other subject that we could have another beer about a little bit later. Couple things to note. Other than being about 20 degrees south of the equator, our region is completely covered by a shallow tropical ocean. Okay, this ocean would have been about 150 feet deep, so we're talking very shallow, light can penetrate to the bottom. These are called epicontinental seas, and we don't have any modern real examples of that today on Earth. At this time, sea level was much higher and the continents were flooded, okay? I want to point out a couple of fun facts. This is Siberia here, which is our closest neighbor. I always think about like what the politics would be like if that was our current geography. It would be a very different experience. Baltica is right here. So Baltica is going to be the Baltic states. That's our second closest neighbor. It's going to be like Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and parts of Northern Europe. And indeed, later on in geologic time, Baltica attaches to North America to create another new continent called Laurussia. And that's how we get the Caledonian mountain range, which is another fun little fact. So we are attached at one point. But what's interesting here is that this is where New England is and Nova Scotia, right? So parts of what we identify as parts of our continent today are floating out as islands, and they have to come up and accrete and attach to the side of North America, which they will do in a moment. We'll talk a little bit about that. Another just common theme in Earth's history is this huge continent in the southern hemisphere called Gondwana. Gondwana, I like to think of as all the A's. So we're looking at Antarctica, Africa, South America, Australia, a little bit of India and Madagascar in there. Okay. Starting at about 475 million years ago or so, we had a huge collision on the eastern margin of Laurentia. This is the beginning of the building of the east coast of Canada and the United States. So this map gives you a little idea of the state outlines and where we are located right here. My star didn't show up, okay? But we ended up welding a mountain range called the Tectonics to the eastern side of the United States. So this volcanic island arc, this chain of volcanoes, think of it like Japan coming in and colliding with the eastern margin of the United States and getting stuck, okay, coming in and creating a mountain range that lifted up that part of the United States and Canada, creating the basement of what we now know as the Appalachian Mountain Range. Okay, so the Appalachian Mountain Range is actually a collision, a sequence of 3 separate collisions to make it, and this is the first one, okay, of that. You can note that this one here, which is also attaching more of New England, is going to be the second one, which comes in a little bit later. But the point here being that we had these huge mountains, much higher than the modern Rockies today, on our East Coast, what was a time when the Appalachians would have been really, really high. And because there was really no life on land, there's no trees, there's no grass, there's really no soil, these rocks are really exposed to high levels of weathering, okay? And because we're in the southern hemisphere, we would get huge storms, hurricane-sized storms, bigger than anything that we've seen in the modern today, that would come down across in the southern hemisphere, south of the equator, come from east to west and travel down into this region. And as these mountains were eroding, all of the sediment that they were sloughing off was being transported into our area by these huge storm waves that would come in and create these really large submarine mud flows. So when you see the rocks at the cut in the hill and you're looking at all the great dark gray stuff, the shaly stuff, I'll show you a picture here in a minute, what you are seeing is weathered granites that chemically weather into clay, and then that is transported by storm waves into our area beneath the ocean, okay? And so we can think of it like this. This is a graph of, or an image of what shale deposition would have looked like, these clays coming in. They would have been brought in by these very large storm waves at the top, and then because the shale or the clay mixed with water is more dense than just the water, they would travel down slope by gravity. So I don't know, I'm from Canada. We didn't go to the coast much, but when you go to a lake, you know, and you stick your foot in and this plume of mud, stinky mud comes up. Ever do that as a kid? Right? And you're like, ew, that's gross. Well, that is basically what would be coming up, and then gravity would take it down slope and bury alive anything in its path. Okay? And so if you're a trilobite and a mud flow is coming down at you, you might be like, oh, I better get out of the way. I'm going to move over here. Or I better roll up to protect myself and hope I survive. But if you're like a brachiopod and you can't move, you're SOL, basically, right? And that's why we have the most amazing fossil record that we have in Cincinnati. Okay, that's what these rocks look like, okay? So here's a couple of examples of the Cope Formation, which is what we've been talking about. Geologists name formations based on their distinctive characteristics. It's sort of a lexicon of information that we use so that we know when we talk to each other, we know what we're talking about. It's just our own dictionary. And the Cope Formation is what we see mostly in Cincinnati. So most of the hills that are in Cincinnati from bottom to top are Cope Formation. There's a little bit of other stuff at the top, but we don't have to go into that. So the Cope Formation is classically dominated by 75% clay. This is going to be really important. So this clay is coming from the shedding of those tectonic mountains to the east, being brought in by the storm waves and basically covering and depositing and filling up the ocean basin in the Cincinnati area, Cincinnati, Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky region. So why is this really important for us? Why are these clays so important for landslides? By the way, Bob's right. If you do go to any of these sections and look in the rocks, you'll find massive amounts of fossils. It's crazy. I've had paleontologists come literally cry, tears streaming down their face because they're so happy there's so many fossils here. Right? This is a special thing for us. This is not normal. Okay, I've been all over the world to collect fossils, and this is not a normal thing. So we're really, really very lucky here. That aside, the reason why our Ordovician seafloor is so important is because it is the bedrock of our city. It is what we are building on most of the time, okay? And because of that, we need to understand the inherent geological properties of what we are building on, right? It's really important that when you make a new building, you know what your geotechnical engineer is telling you, right? You need to understand the properties, the behaviors, the mechanics of the type of rock or soil that you're working on, or when you're going to build a house or buy a house, what is your house actually built on? Something that we don't really think about an awful lot. And the problem is that the clays that come from this ancient ocean that used to cover most of the region are really inherently weak. We call it an inherently weak material. And that's because clay minerals behave in a certain way. So if you've ever gotten a book wet, right, you know that when you dry it out, the pages splay apart and you can't kind of get them back together again. That's what clay does. Clay minerals are made up of these very tiny, tiny sheets here that are like pages in a book that stack together. And they're held together by charges. They're negatively charged. And when water, which is a positively charged ion, gets in between the pages of the clay minerals, it spreads them apart, like the pages in a wet book, okay? And basically what that ultimately means is that you get mud, right? So what's happening as a result of that is that you are getting a material that is the amount of friction between the different clay minerals in the rock decreases when water hits it, okay? Water is the worst thing for landslides in the entire world. The next thing is that it adds weight to that, and weight is also a big issue. So the fact that our hillsides are made up of this inherently weak material that basically breaks down and separates when it rains is kind of a problem, right? Now, if the rock is not exposed, I don't want to scare you, if the rock is not exposed, like it's back in the hill, it can maintain really great strength, and you can build into that. But it's the top surfaces that over time begin to delaminate and begin to fall down that are the problem. Okay, so part of our landscape issues are related to the fact that we've had these ancient clays deposited in here in an ancient ocean 450 million years ago that make up the hillsides that we are building on and cutting into when we're making new construction or new roads and so forth. Okay? So already from the gate, we have an inherently weak material. Now, if that inherently weak material was never touched, never exposed to water, never touched by humans, it'd be fine. It can maintain a good cohesiveness, but that's not how it works, right? We like to get in there, we like to do things. And nature does too. So the second part of our issue is going to be the fact that we have taken that inherently weak material and nature, glaciers, have carved hills into it, okay? So we talked about the 450 million year history. This is the 2 million year component of that, the more recent stuff. So have any of you guys ever been to the top of Carew Tower and looked at the landscape from up there? I know it's closed now, but yeah. If you have a chance, or I don't know if it's going to open again or not, you can see, even just from standing downtown, you can see that the hills from Elberon, Price Hill to Clifton kind of pretty much are all the same level, minus a few things, right? Bald Knob is further down. That's been quarried for fill to go beneath the terminal. Clifton Avenue has been quarried from the Fairview Formation. So we had some quarrying hillside removals as well as of our quarrying history. But pretty much for the most part, it's a very flat horizon. And that's called the Lexington Peneplain. And so I want you to think of that as everything that is been carved down, back up, and the whole thing being flat. Okay, and that's where we're going to start the story. So everything up to that level would be ancient clays, okay? Ordovician ancient clays. When I first got to Cincinnati, I was told that Cincinnati is a city of 7 hills. And as a geologist, I was like, well, hills, really? I know there's like hills, but hills imply like a process to someone like me. And I was actually, no, we didn't make hills. We actually made 3 valleys. That's what we did. So instead of lifting up to make hills, we've actually carved down to make hills. We've made valleys, okay? And that's what the glaciers have done. One of the reasons why Cincinnati is so beautiful compared to, I hope no one's from Columbus over here, from Columbus, is that we have the beautiful, we're not flat like that. In other parts of central and northern Ohio, we have the beautiful valleys, right? We love them. They're a problem, but we love them, okay? And the reason we have them is because the glaciers that came into this region terminated just north of Cincinnati, like in the Sharonville area, for the most part, melted and carved those valleys for us, okay? So there has been a series of different excursions of those into our city. I want to make sure and see what I have here. Yes. There's been at least 3 separate glacial advances into Cincinnati that has shaped our landscape and created our valleys. The first one at 2 million years ago was known as the Kansan. The glacier came in and basically reshaped part of the Ohio River Valley and took the level of that Lexington peneplain from high up here to about 150 feet down in what is known as an ancient drainage known as the Taze River system. So if you've ever wondered how it is that the Mill Creek Valley is 5 miles wide, but the Mill Creek is right? Well, the Mill Creek is what we call an underfit stream, meaning that it is not the stream that actually carved the valley it sits in. It's much younger than the valley that it actually carved. And so what that does is it means that there's a much longer history to carving those valleys done by these glacial excursions. The second glacial excursion into the area happened at about 400,000 years ago. And that one came down all the way almost into downtown Cincinnati and carved our valleys down 100 feet deeper than they are today. Okay? And so as a result of that, the third incursion, known as the Wisconsin, the one that we see that's the latest, and the one that's most recent and we can see evidence of, actually filled those valleys back up with sands and gravels from its melting to its modern levels. So, one of the reasons why we have, the reasons why we have the Mill Creek, the Great Miami, Little Miami is because we had a historical river system, and then we had 3 glacial incursions that came through and carved those valleys down. But as a result of all of that, they created these very steep slopes on the hillsides that create our beautiful valleys that we enjoy and want to live on and all that kind of stuff, right? So Price Hill, all those areas there, Clifton, all of these are very steep slopes at grades greater than 20%. Now, there's a serious problem with that because these inherently weak clays that are created from the Ordovician Ocean are now exposed. They're exposed to water and weathering. They are exposed to steep slopes. And every material, any engineers in the room? Okay, any material, we can talk about this, not a problem. Any material will have what's called an angle of repose. Any sediment will have an angle of repose. You know this because if you ever made sand castles at the beach, right, when you were a kid or a grown-up, either way, you know that if you just take wet sand and put it in a bucket and then you lift it up, it makes a pyramid essentially, right? That angle is the angle of stability of that material. If you add water to it, a certain amount of water, just a little bit, you can get it to actually shape like the bucket. If you add too much water, it becomes a slurry, and then it does nothing, just all over, right? The angle of repose is different for every kind of geological material. It has a strength upon which it can maintain a slope, but once that slope is exceeded, that material will fail. Okay, so when you're building something, unless you put in a mediation technique, if you cut a slope beyond the angle of repose, ultimately gravity will take care of it for you and bring it down. Okay, so our slopes in Cincinnati, like what we see here on Mitchell Avenue there when they did that wonderful removal of all the vegetation, do you remember that, for I-75? And then they didn't do anything with it for a while, and then it all began just slumping down because they had cut it too steep for it to hang on anymore. And there was nothing at the bottom to keep it going, okay? So those kinds of things are going to ultimately fail, and the glaciers and the valleys that we have carved are going to be at a greater angle of repose than what the material, our clay, can handle. Okay. Incidentally, I want to point out a couple things here. We have a combination of two factors that are not really great for us, right? We have inherently weak material in our slopes, and we have steep slopes. And that's a problem because that material cannot hang on. This is a wonderful geologic map of our glacial deposits in the state of Ohio. And the beautiful thing about this is that based on the outlines of these glacial deposits, you can see where the glaciers were and where they terminated. Here, this is where we are, of course. And then as the glaciers move back, you can see how they moved back and how they've dumped material as they've receded. So we have a wonderful map telling us where these glacial deposits are. Interesting to note that our glacial deposits are really important for us because they're what gives us really great water in Cincinnati, right? Our natural aquifers are in the Great Miami and the Mill Creek Valley, and they are what industry uses to pull water out for beer making, soap making. Bernard Soap Company is in there. And also 20% of Cincinnatians' drinking water comes from the Great Miami water aquifer. And that is all purified by glacial sands and gravels. So it's kind of important for us. What happens when you expose these slopes to weather, rain, snow, sleet, these natural slopes, is that over time, the top layers of the rock begin to break down and the shale begins to get muddy, but it hangs on to the slope. It just kind of like hangs on there like a mantle. And we call this mixture of tree roots and broken up rock and bits of clay colluvium. It's kind of like the breakdown materials from exposure of rock and soils and biological material over time. And this colluvium mantles all of our hillsides, like completely. And it takes a while for it to develop. So for instance, Columbia Parkway, which we can talk about, it was expanded in in the early 1930s from a one-lane community road to a two-lane two-way system, okay? When they built Columbia Parkway, they cut the hillside, which is a big no-no, right? And took the material off of that hillside and dumped it onto the other side to make the road, okay? Then they put up the big cement wall, which has been redone, and thought that they were done. But over the last 80, 90 years, all of the colluvium has been building on top of that hillside along Columbia Parkway. The rock has been sloughing off. The weathering has caused the clay to break down, to become mud. You know, the roots have sort of churned it all up and segregated it from the hillside. So it's taken about 80 to 90 years for that to build up to gain enough weight for it to begin coming down. And the problem is that those horizons that we see like in Columbia Parkway are like 6 to 8 feet thick, right? So we're not talking about just like a little upper layer. We're talking about like whole sections of the hillside coming down. How many of you have seen video or have experienced Columbia Parkway in all its glory? Yeah. And that really is where we're at in a lot of places in the city. The best way to handle that would be if you scraped the hillside completely and got rid of all the colluvium, you would have another 80 years before you had to do it again, right? That would be about the timeline it would take for it to rebuild back up before it would come back down again. But of course, at the Columbia Project, they scraped it and then they bolted it, obviously, to do that. So this is an example here of colluvium that's exposing along the 471 interstate and how we have these minor, very minor sort of surface flows of mud flows coming down. These types of landslides tend to be really, really small. They might be slightly inconvenient. They might, cut down a lane of traffic on your route to work in the morning. Nothing major. What the really big ones are that we have to worry about are, by the way, that's Columbia Parkway in 1930. before they even finished building Columbia Parkway, they had landslides in the fill. Okay, this is a harbinger of like, talk about canary in a coal mine, right? So the big ones we have to worry about are things like this, the Clifton Avenue slide in 1972. So the kinds that we see in Columbia Parkway are a nuisance and very expensive to fix. But they're what's known as translational slides. So they just kind of come down as a mudslide down the hill. These big ones, like on Clifton Avenue, are going to be things that are like what we call rotational slides. Those are when there is a deep fracture or a surface 10, 20, 30, 50 feet down that slides and the whole hillside just slumps right in front of you. Those things are actually caused mainly by human activity, okay, in our Cincinnati history, okay? So what we tend to do are sort of all of these things. Our quarrying history, we would quarry a hill, like on Clifton Avenue, and get the lime out for building roads and construction and other things. And then we would take all the clay and shale and dump it over the hillside, okay? And then somebody 75 years later would build a condominium complex on top of that, right? Not knowing what they're building on. The problem with fill is that not only have you concentrated the inherently weak material from the quarrying activities, but you've taken it out of its geological context, so it doesn't have any structure, and then you dump it. So it's basically just like building on sand. And then you build on top of it, and lo and behold, 50 years later, there's a major landslide, okay, like at Clifton Avenue. So our quarrying history has a really huge impact on here they are dumping fill on the side of a road, and that's a doubly inherent unstable material. The other thing that we do is that we cut hillsides, like the toes of the slope, and then we dump that fill over, like in Columbia Parkway. So one of the major rules in landslides is that you never ever cut the toe of a hill. Just don't ever do it. The bottom of the hill is what is holding the whole thing up. Okay, when you cut that, you are releasing that pressure. If anyone was around in 1982, where they built the I-471 cloverleaf that connected 471 to Washington Way and up through to 71, when they did that, they cut the toe of Mount Adams, and caused a major landslide that resulted in 9 buildings having to be demolished. Anyone around here for that one? Right, yes, Bob was so that huge cement pier wall that you see with the bolts sticking out of it as you drive there? That at the time in 1982 was the most expensive mitigation wall in the United States ever built, right? And that was built in response to the fact that they cut the toe of Mount Adams without thinking about it. They destabilized Mount Adams, created a major landslide, and had to shore it back up again. So that thing is holding Mount Adams up. Yes, that's, whoa, I know, right? So I don't have the dimensions, but yes, there was a tunnel built underneath there that you can drive a car through. And the bolts that you see on the outside are tied back on the other side, and you can go into that tunnel and you tighten the bolts. Every once in a while, the bolts are about like this big to keep the tensile strength on the cables that are holding that section of the wall together. It has to maintain a certain level of tensile strength to hold the hill up. So they have to go in and tighten the bolts every once in a while to maintain it. It's actually a really huge infrastructure project, and it is the most expensive mile of freeway ever built in the United States, because they had to put in that wall in order to keep that freeway clear and to make it work. But they didn't follow the rules. Of course, back in 1982, we didn't know as many of the rules, and they caused a major landslide. Now, you don't have to have huge hills to have landslides, right? You don't have to have this is not like mountain type stuff. I mean, Friendship Park suffered from landslides along the river there. When they put the park in, within the first year, the concrete was already cracking and splitting because it was moving away from from the hill, right? Because the Ohio River's there and it's cutting into the bank. There's a wonderful landslide example. If you think landslides are wonderful, there's a wonderful landslide example. Anyone ever been on McAlpin Drive? I can give you tons of places to go. There's a house there, one house that's been completely abandoned because it had a landslide on its property. It's just like kind of like right in the middle of Clifton, just like right in the middle of Clifton. It happens all the time, right? Some of the other things that we do to promote our landslide issue, besides having our geological history primed and ready for it, is we load the head. So we don't cut the toe of the slope. That's a bad thing to do. This is bad, 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 bad. This is bad. Yes, it is. They have now built a wood legging wall there, though, to hold it up. That is bad. Why would you do that? I know. If I lived up there, I'd be like, Even if I don't fully understand what's happening, it doesn't feel right, right? And now they have a wood legging wall. By the way, that was good for me because I'm a paleontologist, so I got to go and look at all the rocks over there. I was super excited. Okay, yeah, I was super excited. So we load the head, right? So not only do we cut the toe in this case, but we put stuff on top of it. You're begging for disaster when you add weight. People like to live on tops of hills, but then they add a swimming pool. And the swimming pool has water, and water is like one of the heaviest things per cubic inch on Earth. If you've ever had to carry a pack of water, that stuff is heavy. Let's put a swimming pool on top of it, and then let's put everybody have a swimming pool, right, and see what happens. So loading the head is a really bad situation. Cutting and filling roadways. We talked about Columbia Parkway. Cut to make a road, dump on the other side, put a road on it. Once again, you're removing it from its geological context. You're exposing it. It's unstable. You build on top of it, you're going to get problems. Removal of vegetation. So if you've ever looked at any of the historical Cincinnati images of what Cincinnati was like in 1885, they cut every frickin' tree down in Cincinnati. And they did that to supply the steamboats that were the major traffic, way of getting goods around and for building and construction. I mean, the hills were just barren. Trees are really good and vegetation's really good on your hills for two reasons. The first being that it can prevent those shallow landslides. If you're going to have a landslide that's 6 feet deep, they were not going to help you. But they can prevent the translational landslides by binding the soils together with roots, giving it some stability. Also, if you remember, I said that water is the most dangerous thing for landslides, or the best thing, depending on whether you're a landslide or not. Trees and vegetation naturally soak up the water out of the soil. And so they are actually really good for removing the water in a system. And so planting vegetation is really good for those shallow landslides. But when you expose the hillsides and completely denude them with new construction or whatever the case may be, and then you plant a tree here or there or whatever, your token trees, what you're doing is you're removing the ability to bind the upper soil profile and your natural water removal system as a result of that. And then you're exposing it to a lot of the weathering that you don't want it to experience to create all that colluvium and stuff. So removal of vegetation, particularly at larger scale, is also a very dangerous thing to be doing. And we've done all of these things without, for the last 100 and some odd years, without any consideration of what that's going to impact us. So in essence, what we have here in Cincinnati is what I call a recipe for disaster, right? We have a few things that are going against us. First of all, we have ancient marine sediments from that ancient ocean. It's all clay for the most part. It's inherently weak just by its very nature. It likes to attract water and separate. That friction is reduced when it's exposed, and that causes it to become mud and a slurry and very unstable. Okay? Then we add that all of that clay that builds up our hillsides has been carved down into incredibly steep slopes by the glacial incursions that we've had in the region. 3 separate incursions, maybe 4, have come in and carved our beautiful hillsides and our beautiful valleys, but have exposed those rocks to weathering and erosion and buildup and also to steep slopes. Big problem. Okay. Then you add on top of that, that we live in, actually, would you be interested to know this, a humid continental or humid subtropical climate. We get a lot of moisture that comes in from the Gulf of Mexico. And that is part of our natural atmospheric circulation system, that we can't do anything about that, right? And by the way, it's just going to get worse with climate change, right? As the oceans warm up. So we get a lot of water, a lot of rain, a lot of downpours that add a lot of moisture to our slopes. And when you think about an urban setting and an urban landscape, we keep putting concrete over everything. There's really no place for that water to go. Combine that with our amazing ancient sewer storm runoff combined system, which doesn't hold that water very well to get it to the Ohio River. We have a lot of pooling and a lot of water that's staying on the surface, and that again is inherently bad for landslides or for slope stability, okay? Then you add on top of all of those natural things that just come together, that humans have been here, and we like to alter everything. We like to change the slope of hills. We like to cut into hills. We like to build on hills. We like to take water and move it from where it naturally flows to where we want it to go, which is not always the best, right? We change water dynamics, and we have a natural recipe for landslide disasters. And if you look at a map of where the landslides are in the United States, there are 4 main areas. The West Coast, we all know that. Most of those are coastal sediments that are very young, 5 to 10, maybe up to 25 million years. They're basically coastal sands. You can literally take your bucket and your shovel and go dig in them. And pull out stuff. They're not very solidified or calcified yet, so they're very unstable. And the ocean waves, we've all seen the poor rich people in California with their balcony falling over the edge of the cliff. You're either like, aw, or ha ha, one way or the other. You should know better. Then there's the mountains, so the Rockies. There's the Appalachian mountain chain that you can see there in our big swath in the red. And then there's our lovely little area in Ohio that has 3 little tiny fingers on it. And that is the Great Miami, the Little Miami, and the Mill Creek in the middle. Isn't that wonderful? We are, as of the 80s or late 70s, I don't know the stats on this now. I don't think it's ever been calculated. The top per capita city in the U.S. for landslide costs. Right? Pretty crazy. Now there's good news, because I'm going to scare you all with all of this, but there's really good news. And the good news is people are waking up to this. We have a lot of information. We understand a lot more than we used to about landslides. But landslides, unlike other natural disasters, are the only natural disaster that we can actually prevent. Okay? You can't prevent a hurricane, you can't prevent a tornado, you can't prevent a flood. You can prevent a flood in a certain area, but flood mitigation measures ironically stop floods in one area and create floods elsewhere. So that's not a good fix. Landslides are the only one that we know of natural disaster we can say there's a problem, we can fix it. And we have the knowledge and the engineering knowledge and power to fix them before they happen. So right now the city of Cincinnati is pretty much in mitigation mode, right? Which is something happens, like the River Road situation, and you build, or Columbia Parkway, and then you spend $10 million to fix it, right? So we go in sort of after the fact, but we're not in the prevention mode yet, which is if we're going to put a new building here, we need to have the right rules and regulations, all the geotech stuff that needs to be done. We need to do this correctly. Not only do we have to do this correctly for now, but we have to do it correctly for the future as we build in resilient architecture for, climate change and the impacts that we're going to see there. And so the city is in a tipping point where they're starting to recognize that we need to be proactive in hillside usage and hillside construction, create protocols and things like that that will help the city rather than being reactive. Because once you have a landslide on your private property, there's no landslide insurance, right? There's no coverage. It's a very expensive thing for the homeowner to fix, and it is on the homeowner to do it. The city will not come and rescue you, okay? But we can fix it. We just have to put resources and effort towards it. And that's also good because in Congress, I don't know where it is in Congress right now, but there is a National Landslide Preparedness Act going through Congress that is going to be able to give resources for landslides to various places to begin doing the mitigation and the preemptive strikes towards landslides. And so hopefully we'll see that go through, and then Cincinnati will be able to get money and we'll be able to be a bit more proactive about our landslide issues that we have here in Cincinnati. All right, everybody. That's where we're at. I'm happy to continue the discussion. Does anybody have any questions, anything like that? Yep.
I'm just curious why building permits don't catch more of this, and it appears that they do.
I don't know. I'm on the geology side of things. I do know that certain construction, like big scale construction projects, require that to have a geotechnical engineer on site. There's really not much oversight in that and who the geotechnical engineer is or what their recommendations are. If it's going to be a big project, council may see it like a big shopping mall or something like that. But when it comes to the homeowners, there's nothing on there that requires you to have any of those types of permits. And contractors and building contractors are not required to have any of that. What's even worse than that is that you can buy a home, say, from Fisher Homes in like a complex, and then you have problems, years later, and they're not required to have any kind of fund to help support any problems, and they're not required to inform the owner that there's problems with the land either. I know, it's due diligence on your part. Now, council, we have been working with council to try to get them to put these rules in place for builders, but it is on the homeowner to figure all of this out. Just like it's on the homeowner to get an inspection, to check for radon if you want to, it is on the homeowner to check for landslide or geology potential or anything like that on your land. No one has to disclose. And real estate agents do not have to disclose if there has been a previous landslide on your property either. There is no disclosure of history of landslides anywhere in any of those transactions.
So are there places you can go or resources you can go to, like you get a house inspector, you get all of those things that you normally think about,
Yeah.
when you're buying a house or when you're building?
Right.
Are there professions, I guess, or experts that you can actually say, I would like you to inspect the land?
Yes, you can hire a geotechnical engineer. It is not cheap, but if you're buying a $500,000 home or a $350,000 home, it's worth the investment to get that checked. Now, there's a website called the Hillside Trust. Has anyone ever heard of the Hillside Trust? Yes, they are wonderful. So they are not opposed to hillside building, but what they do is they advocate for the thoughtful use of our hillsides. And I work with them, and they're like huge landslide people. They have a map on their website that shows in Cincinnati where the slopes on the hills are greater than 20%. If you are buying property on a hillside that has a slope greater than 20%, you should really think about hiring a geotechnical engineer to make sure that you are safe. If you're buying on flat, like super flat, or moderately flat, maybe not so much to worry about it. But if you want to locate that map, and it's also public information from the city council, you can know immediately, I'm in an area that has greater than 20% slope on some hills surrounding me. Keep in mind that a homeowner is not in isolation. I mean, landslides don't just hit your property and then forget to go against the next parcel. So what the people are doing next door to you or 5 houses down, that landslide can translate across all of it. So you really got to be You know, get to know your neighbors, but also really be diligent on that and hire a geotechnical engineer if you think there's any issues that you need. But that's on the homeowner. There's no, yeah. Mm-hmm.
The slide that showed the three main areas
Yep.
that had the landslides, I saw that down to the right, there's Portsmouth in that area in West Virginia. Is that under the same situation of us where we have the unstable clay material? Or is that due to like the coal and like the composite?
It's going to be mostly related probably to the fact that they're in the Appalachian Mountain Range. And that's going to be, yeah. But also I can imagine, I don't know the specifics, but I can also imagine that quarrying is also going to be a huge problem there as well. Pittsburgh is kind of like our sister city in this as well. They have a lot of landslides. They're pretty much the same setup we are. Different age deposits, but, and you know, anything around a river, right, which cuts into the hillsides always is going to be a problem. So we live on our bend of the Ohio River right here in front of Cincinnati is an outside bend where we're located, and the outside bend is the place where the river cuts, and the inside bend on the Kentucky side is the place where the river deposits. So we're on a cut bank already. So the river is actually moving towards us in downtown Cincinnati as it's cutting through, and that destabilizes everything. Hence the River Road major $10 million project they had to put down there.
Park and all of that as well.
Yeah, yeah. There's people that bought condos down there on River Road that were never told that it was a landslide issue, and they have to abandon their property because it's not livable anymore, and there is no help for them. It's just a loss.
They just take the loss.
They take the loss. Yeah, no real estate agent ever mentioned that there's a history of landslides, that it's landslide susceptible. Nothing. Nothing. And there's not, I'm trying to work to see if I can figure out some resources for landslides for people, but the problem is that if you pinpoint a property as landslide prone, you're up for liability issues because then it has lower resale value. Someone's going to get sued. I mean, like you can't pinpoint someone's property and say, I'm just going to tell you you're going to get landslides and I'm going to devalue you by $100,000 with one sentence.
All the other parcels are going to be
Yeah,
subject to the same.
like it's really tricky.
So Pittsburgh, you're saying it's just a city that has similar problems. They have a similar mineral profile, like geological profile.
Yeah, they're on Devonian rocks, but it's a similar kind of situation with a lot of clay in there.
Inherently unstable.
Yeah, and they have the river there, which is cutting into the city, and yeah, it's very similar. Yeah. We're all going to sleep well tonight. I know. I know. The thing about it that fascinates me is just that geology is still happening. Like, we think that geology happens to people in California, over there, right? That's where the things happen. Or maybe in the mountains when they have like a landslide there. But geology doesn't happen in Cincinnati, right? So, but it does, and we forget that it does. And we have to consider these things. So, yeah, it's getting better, but it's still something to think about and to worry, and not to worry, well, yeah, I guess you could worry about it. This is me who just bought an 1875 farmhouse on a hill, by the way, with a creek. So, I'm like,
In a previous talk you had, you talked about how excited geologists get with excavations and
yeah.
destroying stuff, essentially. What is some of the more interesting things you found that surprised you in those excavations?
Huh, interesting. Well, this is actually really young paleontology, but we dug at Big Bone Lick, Kentucky a few years ago, and we found a bison deposit. So I don't work with vertebrates typically, but I'll dig anything, you know. And what was really cool about the bison deposit was, one, rather than doing what I typically do, which is take rock hammers and saws and like pound really heavy rock all day long, I could just pluck the bones out of the mud. So that was like super fun. But the second thing was that we found spear points in the rib cages of a lot of these bison. And so that was kind of a nice bonus when you're like, oh, this is a butchering site. You know, we have the data. There's the spear point stuck in the rib. Like, you know, that's kind of a fun thing. So that's fun. I've been to other fun places like Morocco, where, you know, I found big ancient like placoderm fish. Just, yeah, it's amazing stuff. It's just discovery at its best, right? Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I have my home
Yeah.
sits on the west side above Taylor Creek on a ridge, and it's built on backfill.
Ah.
And some 15 years ago, I hired an engineer, and they came in and put pilings
Yes.
down,
Yes.
bedrock.
That's expensive, but yes.
It
Mm-hmm.
was about $30,000.
Mm-hmm.
And they, I'm still getting cracks and things like that. It was built in 1974.
Okay.
I'm looking at 80 years, and maybe 30 years from now, so I should sell before then.
So, what, like the cracks, where are the cracks? Are they like at doorways and?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Corners of the rooms.
Yeah.
Like that.
It's hard to tell sometimes between seasonal movements. You know, you get cracks every once in a while if it's been a really dry year, which it has been this year, versus a really wet year or a cold and warm year. Because houses do move, they flex, you know, naturally, and not always the older homes have been built with the materials that allow that flexure to happen really well, like we do in some cases with the modern stuff. So it's hard to tell. You're down to bedrock.
That's what I understand, yes.
I mean, I feel like you should be fine. That's about as secure as you're going to get. Do you know how deep the pilings are?
They must have gone down
15 feet, yeah, to bedrock. I feel like you're pretty secure. I mean, I'm not an expert in building engineering, but that's about the best case scenario, is dig down to bedrock, put the pilings in. Yeah,
That was further than they expected to go.
of course. Yeah, but that's how we should be building, especially if we're building on backfill. Pilings down, because ultimately if you don't, then you're going to get a $100,000 bill later. But yeah, but that's not how our codes have been in the past. Yeah. Yes, there are people in the Cincinnati that have spent $100,000 to get a wall put in their backyard, only to have the wall fail and have to rebuild it. And there's no help with that, because there's no there's also, just to make you sleep a little less tonight, there's no contingency plan. There's no, like, I'm not trying to find the right word.
If this doesn't work,
If this doesn't work, we're going to come back and fix it for free. Or there's like a 15-year warranty on this. Like, there's nothing like that with these things. And the problem with landslide issues is that they take a while to build and to be exposed. So you could buy a house in 1975, but realize that you're having problems in 2010. It's taken 30 years for it to build up to the point where it's going to fail. But you would never see that as the homeowner, and the previous homeowner wouldn't necessarily have seen that either until it fails. So you've just got to do your due diligence on what is beneath my structure that I'm wanting to buy. Is it fill? Is it bedrock? What is it? Is it agricultural farmland? You know,
right?
all those things, and just know, knowledge is power, and just know what it is. I keep saying, you know, we check the roof, we check the doors, we check the radon levels, we check all these things, but we don't check what our house is built on, right? Like, we never do. It's kind of, yeah. Yeah.
I have a question. You mentioned Mount Adams and that wall.
Mm-hmm.
I used to live on a street in Mount Adams, and this is a long time ago, 1978 or
Before the big wall.
yes, I guess so. It was a street called Baum Street, B-A-U-M, and that street no longer exists. Was that
Oh,
one of the ones that were
yes.
disappear-
Yes.
that had a problem?
I believe so. If I'm recalling correctly, they just basically wiped it out.
Because was
Yeah.
the street itself falling off the hill, or
I think that they just ended up taking it in part because they needed to do it to build the wall,
okay?
kind of like an eminent domain situation.
Well, when we
But they
lived
did
there-
lose structures on there.
Well, when we lived there, everybody kept saying in the apartment building that we were falling off the hill.
Yeah, that street did lose structures in that landslide,
Yeah.
but they had to just basically wipe the whole thing out to put the structure in. Yeah. Good times. Well, and you know, I don't know if you guys know the Overlook Tavern up on Mount Adams. It faces the city. Do you remember? Was it a couple years? Pandemic years. I don't remember. It was prior to the pandemic. They had a huge landslide in their backyard, just right over the Overlook. They had to close the whole thing down. A landslide from their porch came down and ran into a private residence below them, and destroyed the private residence. So it's even still ongoing. It's hilly, you know, it's still ongoing. Yeah.
And there's no insurance for any of that.
No insurance.
And Playhouse is busy building on that area.
Yes. Yes. Yes, and depending on the contractor or the building company who's doing that, they may or may not have to put their plans through council. And it's squishy on what the requirements are for that and what they are required to do as a result of that. But they will have to have a geotechnical engineer on that one. I have no doubt, which is a good thing. They don't always get it right either.
Is there, oh, go ahead.
Yes.
So if you wanted to figure out what was underneath your own property, how would you do it? Whether it's fill or bedrock or?
It's going into the historical archive literature. It's going to the public library. It's coming to Cincinnati Museum Center, to our Historical Society Library, plug for the CMC. It's looking at old city plots and figuring out what was underneath there in the history of your property. It's digging, not like, but paper digging. You have to, it's up to you to.
Local libraries have stuff like that?
Yes, they do.
Like local
City
public
plots,
libraries?
they have city planning back all the way back into the 18th century. Yeah, it's going to be digging in your own, you know, going to, who is it now? It used to be Dusty Roads, but now it's the, thank you, website for, and looking at your parcels and seeing what the history might be there, if anything. Yeah, that's on you. It could be a really fun thing, or it could be really like maddening, but
Depressing.
It sounds really fun and scary.
yeah,
Are there certifications for geotechnical?
yes,
engineers? Okay.
absolutely, yes, they are certified. Yeah,
Any early cephalopods in the area, like nautilus or anything like that?
any early cephalopods in the area?
Or is that like far later?
No, we have, so nautilus is, of course, a relatively new thing in the geologic record, but we have an ancient, so nautilus is the only exteriorly shelled cephalopod family alive today. All other cephalopods have either lost their shell like octopuses
Or put it inside?
or put it inside like cuttlefish. Back in the Ordovician, I don't have a picture, well, there's one right there of the old diorama. Cephalopods like that, by the way, would never lay on the ground, so that's scientifically inaccurate, but still kind of fun. They have externally shelled, much like nautilus. We have a couple in Cincinnati area that are coiled, but then most of them are straight shelled, what we call orthoconic nautiloids. Those are the top predators in the ocean at that time. They get up to about 25 to 30 feet long. Yeah, they're massive. They're like swimming, I like to think of them as telephone poles swimming through the ocean with these really like powerful jaws that can crunch through anything. They're pretty amazing. I wonder if I have a picture of one on here.
Is it only the shells that are left over? Or
Actually, it's not the shells at all. Typically, it's the internal molds of the animals.
Okay.
So the shells of the cephalopods are made of a mineral called aragonite. And
Good on spaghetti.
yeah, good on spaghetti. And that particular mineral doesn't do well in a calcitic ocean. So our ocean was dominated by calcite. So what happens is upon death, that shell just disintegrates, but it leaves an internal mold behind. So you get like the sediment fills the shell goes away, and then you get the internal structures. Yeah. Shall we have a beer together?
What happens to, we have friends and we visited several times to Indonesia. What happens to countries like that have the earthquakes and the landslides? Will they just like disappear into the ocean eventually?
So the Earth is really good about taking down what's been built up. That's the job of the Earth. If it's being built up, it will be taken down, and gravity will do it. But Indonesia, I don't have specifics, but I know that they have a lot of volcanic activity there too, and they will build up as they're built, as you know, like that process is dynamic. I don't know where your friends live exactly, but it's much like the Hawaiian Islands. They will eventually be gone and become islands underneath the ocean. In fact, the Hawaiian island chain is 70 islands long, but only 5 of them, or 5 or 6, are above the surface of the ocean right now because they are the youngest. All the other 65 are under the ocean now because they have been basically eroded away. So that ultimately is going to be, I don't know specifically about your friends in Indonesia, but ultimately over geologic time, there's no hurry. You know, no one needs to leave now. Although climate change is speeding things up, ultimately it will, the landslides will take care of it. Is that my phone?
No.
Oh, okay. It's my ring, so I. No, it's okay. I just always, I have young children, so I'm always on high alert.
Brenda,
Yeah.
before we close,
Sure.
you want to take a minute or two to talk about your news for 2023?
Right. So after about 30 years, and I said that I was either going to die or retire, but this was going to happen before either of those events, so I am ahead of schedule, which is really great. The Museum Center is opening its new Ancient Worlds Gallery in September of 2023. This is really exciting for us. It's going to showcase the geologic history of the Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky region, going from all of our beautiful Cincinnatian rocks from 450 million years old up to through what we call the Carboniferous period, which is about 300 million years. So all of the geology that's exposed at the surface of Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky, and the fossils that we have from our collection are going to be on display. And it's going to be super fancy. There's going to be great media. It's one of the highest tech exhibits that we're putting in. It's going to have about 400 fossils in there. And it's going to really discuss, not like this is a trilobite, so yay, which I love, but really more like tell stories about the lives of these creatures and how they interacted and how they made communities and how they were impacted by mass extinctions and fun things like that. And major evolutionary stories like the evolution of Jaws and how that impacted the landscape and things like that. So it's very exciting. We're thrilled. If you know the Museum Center at all, it's going to be in the ramps down from the globe in front of the DNA lab and then down towards the cave. So it's going to kind of fill in a space that we've had empty for a while because it's always been ready to go there. And so September 2023, please come and join us. It's going to be an amazing extravaganza of fossils and geology. Thanks for reminding me. Oh, I should also mention before I know you're like, there is a documentary that was filmed called Living with Landslides. I am thankfully in it, and it was a wonderful experience. But if you want to go on the Living with Landslides website, there are clips and everything associated with that. It was funded by the Hillside Trust, and we're currently working on getting it aired on PBS. It's been aired on PBS already, but we're working to get it aired like on a good national production date. I don't know when that's coming, but you can look at livingwithlandslides.com or .org, one or the other, and keep updated on that. It's a wonderful film. We've also highlighted it a couple places. We've highlighted it at Esquire. We've highlighted it at the Redmoor in Northside, and there may be other opportunities to see it as well. So keep posted with that, and that will explain a whole lot more of the business admin side of things than I can tell you, because of all the experts that are on the film. So it'll be really great. All right.
Thank you so much, Brenda. That was fascinating. I don't know about you, but the next time I'm stuck on Cutting a Hill, I'll have millions of years of history to think about instead of traffic. A big thank you to Urban Artifact and Radio Artifact for their partnership. Be sure to follow them on YouTube and Twitch. The next Science on Tap will be Wednesday, January 11th. That'll be the second Wednesday. We normally meet on the first Wednesday, slight change for January only. We will be discussing gender diversity and perception, and the format will also be different. It'll be an interactive conversation with our invited participants and the audience. Hope to see you there. I will be posting information on Facebook about that event, so you can follow it there. Thank you for coming tonight, and I'm looking forward to seeing everyone in 2023 for another year of science.